office. Is it a revolution or not? He claimed it was. The election of 1800, very briefly, again, one of the strangest that happened in American history. I'll just give you the highlights of it, or lowlights. You saw the video, and for the fake political commercial, that actually is what the words that were used, going back and forth between those who supported John Adams and those that supported Jefferson. So in the aftermath of the campaign, where both of them had said, look, we're not going to actively campaign, you have people on your behalf. In 1796, it had been an election where Adams wins, Jefferson comes in second. You have the two individuals run again. Jefferson puts as his vice president, and it is the caucus of the Republicans, Aaron Burr, Republican senator from New York. Burr has real revolutionary credentials, okay, which is what you need to run for high office. He had been a veteran of the American Revolution. He had practiced law, sometimes on opposite, sometimes on the same side as Hamilton. They knew each other. We'll get into the relationship a little bit later. But it makes sense for Jefferson and the Republicans to put a New Yorker, a rising star, they all assume, Aaron Burr, on the ticket as vice president. Adams runs again with one of the members of the Pinckney family, and Hamilton behind the scenes tries to manipulate things once again and favor Pinckney over Adams.
Okay, this is about Hamilton.
Sure.
Like, the play, it makes him seem like he was a very important figure, but he chose to focus on all the good stuff he did.
Sure. Oh yeah, yeah.
Because I mean,
yeah.
When I was reading that book about the Affair of Honor,
yeah.
I'm like, how come no one's talked about that he was like a monarchist kind of?
Right.
I mean,
right.
So...
Yeah, we'll get into that, a little of that as we get towards the duel. But yeah, that's a great question, and that's a great example of the literature around Burr from the get-go, casting him as a villain. Right. The musical glosses over some complicated parts of Hamilton's life. He was an abolitionist, anti-slavery. It's not as clear-cut as that seems. Burr owned slaves and then supported in the New York legislature a manumission law. Hamilton had, let's just say, a nuanced, complicated relationship with the women in his life. Burr is full on for equal rights for women. Way ahead of his time on that. He and his wife, I mean, that's one of the things you read if you go online and look up and research Burr and Hamilton. Hamilton, had an affair. Burr, they wrote about classic literature. They wrote bawdy jokes to each other.
Wait, he was married. He was still with a woman who was married too, was he not?
What's that?
Theodosia was married when she met Burr, wasn't she?
That I'm not sure about, but it could be right. I mean, yeah.
She was married to a British officer, and when he was away, he was sleeping with her.
Okay.
That's what the musical says.
Oh, I'm not sure. Yeah, again, not sure about that whole.
Because I mean, that's the thing. Like, history has painted Burr as being a bad guy, and I'm like.
Right. Well, this gets back to the whole how you control the narrative, right? Mm-hmm. To me, it's a reminder, and this is going to age me and make it generationally. There was a movie when I was growing up called The Karate Kid, and some of you may not be familiar with it, but you've got Ralph Macchio playing the kid who's the bullied, and you've got the blonde guy, he's beating him up all the time. And now people online have done the whole thing that who's the real bully? Is it the guy who looks like he's getting beat up, or is it the guy who at the end gets face planted because he kicks him in the face? Again, it's a whole thing about well, it's interesting that it reminds me of the parallel. I mean, I know it's like a pop culture thing, and this is a movie from 84, 85, and so this is before all of you were born, and you have no idea maybe what I'm talking about. But they did a show 30 odd years later on Yahoo and you can watch it, I think, on Netflix, called Cobra Kai, which is basically the sequel of this as these characters. So it tries to argue that point that, who, if you think about it, who was the bully and who was the victim? If you apply it to Burr and Hamilton, good, Burr bad, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. Burr shot first, Burr, Hamilton tries to, from the beginning of the lead up to the duel, say, I don't plan on shooting Burr. And Burr is wronged, maybe, and the victim of a lot of terrible things that Hamilton said about him. So why would we blame Burr? Affairs about you all read a book about it. You all understand the idea about why Burr has to show up and defend himself.
It's not right.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
agree.
So immediately Hamilton dies, Burr lives. So you know who the villain and who the hero is, but it's not maybe that clear cut.
But Hamilton, this is the part, he didn't like the idea of dueling.
Right.
But yet he had, how many duels? What was he in? Like 11?
Well, involved in, yeah. Whether or not they actually showed up or not was
But
a,
you know what I mean? Like, he was like, how can
Because he
he?
couldn't keep his mouth shut.
I know. It was just
well,
so just,
in writing, yeah.
but you know what I mean? Like, how can he be opposed to it? He's been in so many. I'm like, you learn from your mistakes.
Yeah.
That's what you're supposed to do.
Exactly. And look, this is that's okay. This is what's implied. I mean, we're going to talk about this anyway, but the idea that, I'm trying to remember if Freeman mentions it at the end of the book, but there is an implication that Hamilton tells someone, I have a more, I'm trying to phrase this correctly. There's even more I can say about Burr, but I'm not going to publish about him. And historians have had a field day with that line in a letter. There's something else even more potentially damaging I could tell you about Burr, but I won't say it.
But you just did it, Howard.
What's that?
But you kind of just did.
So historians have come up with, and the novelists, so this gets to the idea of novelization of these events. There is a novel called Burr. Now it's Hamilton.
Yeah.
Right. So in the 70s or late 60s, I believe, early 70s, he's passed about 10 years ago. Gore Vidal wrote a series of books, and one of them was called Burr. And Gore Vidal, the novelist, said essentially what Hamilton, in that I have a more, even worse thing to say about Burr, but I just can't say it. The novelist implies that Burr had an incestuous relationship with his daughter.
They mentioned that in Affairs of Law.
Okay, they did. Okay, because, and there you go. Now, his daughter, along with his granddaughter, drowned in a shipwreck in 1812 or 13, I want to say, with a lot of his personal letters, which that's why Burr is, the word they use a lot, is an enigma. You don't know about the guy. I mean, what was he going to do out west, and what was he going to do with Hamilton? But no historian has backed up that claim. But as a novelist, you can do it. So Gore Vidal, Burr, and he takes these folks down a peg. It's the 1960s, right? Mm-hmm. It's the counterculture. It's Vietnam. It's civil rights. It's almost the time of women's rights movement and a constitutional amendment that would have put that into formal legal code. And he writes this novel that is darn entertaining. It takes Jefferson down. It says Washington has the backside and legs of a finely shaped woman. I mean, it's just like Washington, and so the little things like that. I mean, it's just, and you're like, oh, I mean, these founders were people we put up on a pedestal. And Gore Vidal takes them down a notch and makes them much more human. He creates a fictional narrator who goes through it. And I read it in graduate school. Lincoln is another one. He wrote like a series of books on American history from that perspective. And they are, the founders are bawdy. They're not politically correct. They are folks that are very human with foibles and land speculating and making money and all this stuff. And, Hamilton, we believe carried on an affair with his wife's sister too.
Exactly.
So, I mean, there's, all this is happening, and I think he humanizes Burr, but the accusation that the novelist puts about what Hamilton knew of Burr's personal life, no historian, including Joanna Freeman, because she wrote an essay about Burr, that the novel, and saying, look, I've never really, the historical record doesn't back this up. And Gore Vidal countered and said, look, I'm sure she's a very nice person and a great historian. He's always, he's out there with his opinions, but I know that this is probably what Hamilton thought. So, I mean, you can insinuate it all you want, but if it's not in the historical record, you can't make that accusation hold up. But as a novelist, you can do it because you're writing about real people, but you're taking historical license. So yeah, it's a book that when the musical came out, everyone was like, okay, great, Hamilton, yeah, that's nice, but Burr could have and Burr's in the musical obviously, but Burr could have a musical too. I mean, Burr could be the counter to Hamilton as far as and questions were always brought up. I mean, why didn't Burr get the musical? Hamilton does. Burr's, and they go through the points about why he is ahead of his time. He's one book on him is called The Fallen Founder. Aaron Burr, Fallen Founder. And that makes the argument that attacks the Burr conspiracy out west, which we can talk about in the future. So
I'm sorry for getting off.
That's okay.
I just had that question to ask.
No. It was something I was gonna bring up when we got to the duel part and to go through the series of events that happen or what we know or what we don't know. But yeah, I'm at the point now where I'm like, wow, in 2 years when this course comes up again, maybe I'll assign, which is rare for like a history class, I might assign a novel. I mean, why not? I mean, it's been done. I mean, I know people who sign, All Quiet on the Western Front, and Dr. Pelgrin assigns novels in his upper level classes. So it might be something to consider to replace maybe one of the books. I'm not sure. But anyway.
The Freeman book was really good.
Yeah, I had another straight political history on Jefferson. It was called Adams versus Jefferson, but I'm thinking I'll do that in the lecture. And this book is supplementary to the lectures. And I think after 3 cycles of assigning it, I think students have taken to it. So anyway, so Jefferson, on the election, right? We get there and the Republicans are really disciplined in 1800. They want to make sure that they don't have a repeat of 1796. And so they have Jefferson and Burr, Adams and Pinckney. The electors are set to vote. A couple states allow the popular vote to determine where the electors choose, but that's a rare thing. It won't be the rule until really the time of Andrew Jackson, which he'll take advantage of. And then the election results come in, and it is a tie in the Electoral College between Jefferson and Burr. Now, you cast Jefferson and Burr tie. How is that possible? Because what's supposed to happen, they did not specify whether your vote was for president or vice president. You cast 2 ballots. A constitutional an amendment changed that. That was the 12th Amendment, I believe. Yeah, the 12th Amendment. And so what essentially happened was the Republican Party, Jefferson and Burr, were too disciplined. There's someone supposed to throw out a vote or vote for somebody who doesn't have a chance of winning. And so that Jefferson finishes first, Burr is a electoral vote or 2 behind. That's what happened with Adams. He finishes really 3rd or 2nd or whatever, you tied 2nd. I mean, Jefferson and Burr are tied. So you've got that breakdown. Let me see if I think I actually have a slide for that. I can show you what we're talking about when it comes to, here we go. Yeah, here it is. Okay. So Jefferson Burr, 73 electoral votes, which are 53% of the electoral vote. We don't have the count for popular vote yet. That happens first in 1824. Adams Pinckney. So you see what happens. The Federalists do the good work of having their preferred presidential candidate get more votes and their vice president finish 2nd, and then someone votes for John Jay. He gets 1 electoral vote, which is great because president, vice president. But the Republicans, the Democratic Republicans, as they're called here, to not be confused with the modern Republican Party, voted each time they both voted for Jefferson and Burr. Someone forgot to throw away their vote. And you can see the support here. You have electoral votes divided. In states, obviously, New York goes to Burr and Jefferson. That was showing the strength of the party outside of the South. The Federalists along the East Coast of North Carolina are still relatively strong. New England is still solidly for Adams and will be solidly for the Federalists well beyond 1812, really, until the party effectively is done for. Here's Burr. Go ahead.
I finally understand why, what's New England? I'm sorry, I just realized
Okay.
the states. I just made the connection. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, Massachusetts, Maine is part of Massachusetts, so it's not separate yet until 1820. But there's that solid block that Adams and then his son John Quincy Adams can always count on. All right. So what happens if there's a tie? The Constitution is pretty specific. Burr should have, and this is why he's always vilified. Burr should have said, "Hi, look, everybody, I get it. It was supposed to be Jefferson at the top of the ticket, then me. I have no interest in becoming president. I'm not supposed to be president. I was placed with Thomas Jefferson with the express plan that I would be vice president." And he never does that.
Well, why would he?
Why would he? Because that's the understanding that the party and the leader of the party, Thomas Jefferson, thought they had.
It's not his fault they made a mistake.
See, you're making a great point. But everyone since 1800 has said what I'm saying. He should have just stepped back. And you're saying, well, this is his golden opportunity to be president. Why not? And sure, but you're not supposed to be ambitious.
True.
And you're not supposed to want the job. And there has to be an understanding that, okay, it's Jefferson and me. I'm waiting in the wings. A loyal vice president can be president later on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's still probably in his 40s. I don't know his exact age in 1800. Jefferson is 57. So there's an age difference there. He could wait 4 or 8 years and then on his own. I mean, Adams was a loyal vice president for 8 years in a job he hated, in a job that no one knew what the hell he was supposed to do in that job. And then he became leader of the Federalist Party in 1796. So what happens if there's a tie? The Constitution is clear. The states vote. And what you do is, if you have a certain number of representatives in the House, Delaware maybe has 1, Virginia 3 or 4. No matter how many you have, 1 state, 1 vote. There are 16 states in the United States in 1801 when the election results will actually happen. John Adams is waiting in the wings like, I mean, I clearly lost, but what happens if they don't figure this out by, March? Because that's when the president would be sworn in, not January like it is today. So 16 states, 8 have Republican majorities as far as the House of Representatives. 8 have Federalists. Can't make this up. It's split right down the middle. It's split right down the middle. The House votes beginning in 1801. They vote 31 times. Guess what the vote is for all 31 times? 8. 8 for Jefferson, 8 for Burr. Burr.
One state, one vote.
Yes. Yeah. So you need a majority. And no one has a majority yet. Split right down the middle. So Burr not only doesn't, and okay, now I want you, Caitlin, to defend Burr's behavior here. He begins to talk to Federalists in Congress and say, I'll switch my party and I will carry out and continue Federalist policies if I am chosen as president in the House.
He could just be saying that.
Exactly. He's a politician. And that's where Alexander Hamilton enters the picture. Hamilton says, and there's 2 quotes associated with Hamilton in connection to Burr, at least in this instance. He's going to show up again when Burr's looking for a job after he's basically cast off. Hamilton says about Burr, let not the federal party be responsible for the elevation of this man, meaning the Federalist Party. Let not the federal party be responsible for the elevation of this man, because Hamilton calls him the most unfit man to be president. Now that's saying something, because Hamilton thinks Jefferson is a wild-eyed, Bible-burning fanatic. But Burr's worse, apparently, according to Hamilton. In the mind of Alexander Hamilton, you know what you're going to get with Jefferson. All the decisions will be bad. But Jefferson is is moored in his opinions, and he's not going to just, oh, wait, I can ride the presidential wave on being a Federalist?
That's how politics works.
But Hamilton says Jefferson would never do that. Jefferson isn't going behind the scenes. Or is he?
He is.
Or is he? Or is Jefferson also telling Federalists in Congress, I will not dismantle the Federalist policies once in office? It's always Henry Adams, a descendant of the Adamses. When he wrote The History of the United States, said that Thomas Jefferson out-federalized the Federalists because he didn't clean house. He didn't undo all of Hamilton's policies.
And he hated all of them.
Right, so here we are. Jefferson good in this case, Burr bad, Hamilton good, Burr bad. But Burr is being just a political opportunist. But to Hamilton, he is a Catiline. As a reference to ancient Rome. Catulus was a senator who lived from 108 BC to 62 BC and tried to undo the Roman Republic and the Senate specifically. He's an opportunist. That is the argument Hamilton makes. Let not the federal party be responsible for the elevation of this man.
But in the Constitution, it says that the government can be overthrown by the elected officials if they feel like it's not doing its job right?
No. In the Constitution, there is no right of revolution in the Constitution. Trust me. In the Declaration.
Yeah, it's that. I'm sorry, I get them both confused.
No, you make a good point, because in 11 years, we went from government bad but necessary to we need a stronger government.
Exactly.
Yeah,
like, you know what I mean? Like, so isn't them having different parties one after another good because it gets.
Some would say good, some would say bad, but Jefferson certainly thinks it's significant that whoever, if it's him or Burr, becomes president, there be a peaceful transfer of power. But how can you on a dime just turn and say, well, all of a sudden I'm a Federalist? This is Hamilton's problem with Burr. We can't trust the man. I mean, he's a Republican up to this point. Now he's working behind the scenes, making unknown promises to members of the Federalist Party so that when they vote again in the House, they will support him. So that's what Hamilton behind the scenes does. He warns everybody about what a Burr presidency would be like.
I wonder what he thinks about it now, about what's going on now.
They're rolling in their graves. I feel like.
Well, yeah,
I
clearly.
hate to say it.
And anyway, so staying here in 1800 or so, we have this campaign by Hamilton to make sure Burr doesn't win when the vote. We're getting close to March. I mean, what happens if they don't have a vote by March? John Adams is like, oh crap, am I going to have to still be president? Because he wants to leave. He understands he's clearly lost.
Oh, I thought you got Washington. I thought he was like.
No, Washington passed. No, he's dead. He died in 1799. Washington finally able to get that big retirement in the sky, not being called to do anything else. So they have these threats made. The governor of Virginia, James Monroe, tells Jefferson, look, if they try to take the presidency from you, let me know. I will arm the militia in Virginia. And so we get all kinds of intrigue happening close to the election day. Huh, really? Because, that's never happened before. People thought about what happened 2 months ago. And nevertheless, it has. And here we have intrigue behind the scenes, and it worries a lot of Federalists, a couple of whom decide we're just not going to cast a vote. James Bayard of Delaware says we won't vote, or we'll throw out our vote, and then we'll minimize the number of states. If not, by not casting a vote for our particular state, we can put Jefferson over the top because the number of votes goes from 16 to another number, and eventually he gets, not necessarily. If you have a constitutional crisis coming up, he decides it's probably the best way to get through it. And on the 32nd or 35th or whatever number it is, but they tied 31 or so times, they finally have Jefferson get the majority of the states. The majority is no longer 16, it's like 14 or 13. And Burr finishes second, which is the way it was supposed to be. You can imagine that Thomas Jefferson is not at all thrilled with Aaron Burr. He undermines him from the very get-go. He is not in the cabinet. He is not consulted on any appointments in his home state of New York. And it's very clear that he is not going to stick around if Jefferson is interested in running for a second term in 1804. So it is Burr who begins to think about charting his own course, which is going to lead him to another confrontation with Hamilton as he attempts to run for governor of the state of New York. So Jefferson in office, March 1801, at his inaugural address, he says, and no one hears it because he's not a great speaker, he is not a confident speaker, "We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists." Okay, that's called bipartisanship. Whether or not you believe it or not is a whole other matter. He wants to do this as far as the Revolution of 1800. Revolutionary because there was a new administration, a new political party, 12 years of the Federalists. Now we've got the Republicans in power. And the significant part of the story is nobody died. You know, there aren't guillotines and firing squads and we're like, oh, so what? We have elections all the time where the party changes. And for the US in 1800, that was a pretty big deal. It showed that this country constituted as a republic might actually make it. Jefferson believes in the revolution of 1800, whether or not it's revolutionary or if he institutes revolutionary change, we can still argue about. Reduce the power of the government, that's the true meaning of the revolution. That's what he wants to do. So let's put that in practice and go back to the notes and see what he actually does, the myth versus the reality. He wants the central authority of the United States to be a lot more like the Articles of Confederation, a firm league of friendship with the states. That's his dream, a weak national government. It's really what he wants. So he sells the horse-drawn carriage. He didn't need it. He makes himself accessible to others. Little things. And we're thinking, oh, what's the big deal? Is this significant? Well, it was significant when Washington made the initial choices about being president. These are significant as well. If you approached the president's house, as it was called in 1801, it would not be unlikely for Thomas Jefferson to answer the door.
What?
Exactly. There's no Secret Service. There's no entourage. His staff is one private secretary, a man from Virginia named Meriwether Lewis. Sound familiar? Yes, that Meriwether Lewis.
So what would his idea be about with the White House being like it is today? Would he agree with it since people have died over it?
Probably he would be surprised, maybe appalled by the scope and size of government in everyday life, but also the society's changes that have happened in the United States would have surprised a lot of things would have surprised him. A lot of things would have surprised him. And I'm just going to state the obvious. A black president would have utterly floored Thomas Jefferson and just about all of the founders.
Finally.
Yeah. I mean, it would have absolutely shocked Thomas Jefferson. Based on his writings in the notes on the state of Virginia, where he did not think that people of African descent were equal. And to make him aware of that, we've always hypothesized if you took one of the founders, all of them, who would have been the most quick to adapt to modern times? And my answer is always Franklin. Burr would be up there. Franklin would have a Twitter account in a Facebook page in about 15 minutes.
And he would love it.
And he would love it. The others, I'm not sure. But again, this is getting a little bit into, I mean, both parties love to claim the mantle of Jefferson as far as, the modern Republican Party and the Democratic Party, because, they like to say he did found the Democratic Republican Party, connected to Jackson, connected to the modern Democratic Party. And both cases is a little bit of a stretch. But there are certain philosophies that the modern parties believe in that I think Jefferson would have connected with as well. Yeah. He put a table in the president's house. It wasn't called the White House yet. The president's mansion, the president's house, a round table. So diplomats and people from overseas came and said, okay, I'm sitting at the head of the table because I'm the British minister and the Dutch minister sits somewhere else. And Jefferson's like, whoever sits first gets the first seat. And people were horrified by that. This egalitarian style was brought to the White House. And he'd answer the door of the president's house in house slippers and a coat, a robe, basically. And hi, I'm here to see the president of the United States. And he would say, I am the president of the United States. Now, would that be everyday routine? Not really, but it might happen. It might happen. The American federal city. Let's talk about the glories that is not Washington, D.C. in 1801. Here is the formal plan of Washington, and this is in, wow, German? Plan der Stadt, Washington. Okay, so I picked anyway, you get the idea of how. He could. The city on the Potomac, the federal city, is free from the temptations or influence of lobbyists or anything else, and Thomas Jefferson loved it that way. It is surrounded by woods, an artist's schematic of the still unfinished Capitol. This is Washington in 1801. Mud-filled streets with tree stumps. You can see the camp here that is built for workers, white and black. Let us not forget that the president's mansion was built by slaves. There's a great, great scene in John Adams when he is the first president to take up residence in the president's house. As he arrives, he sees it, and it's CGI. I get it. It's done fairly well. But he, as a New England man with his wife, get out of the carriage, and there are slaves looking up, and they're working, clearing stumps, and they're bringing in more bricks, and the fires are still burning inside the president's house because the plaster hasn't dried yet. And he looks back, and he gets to the steps of the still incomplete staircase to the front door of the president's house. He and his wife look over his shoulder and see a bunch of black folks there working around the yard, and she says, Abigail, I believe, what good could come of such a place? And then the guy who's in charge, says, okay, we'll show you all inside, and says, the Negroes will get your packages and your luggage, Mr. President. And of course, when he leaves, which is a few months later, he takes residence in 1800. It's an election year. He loses the election to Burr or Jefferson. He didn't know. But then you show him leaving, and basically it's a stagecoach. He leaves before Jefferson is sworn in because Adams doesn't want to be there for that. So he gets on the stagecoach with other people who are just happen to be also leaving Washington. And they all look at him and they're like, look at each other like, are we getting on a little carriage and sharing it with the president? And he looks around, he's quite annoyed. He's like, it's just John Adams now. And then just, no circumstance or pomp or anything like that. And he's leaving, and Jefferson is going to get sworn in. So here's the Capitol. Again, it's not grand. There's no rotunda. It's basically a temporary bridge covered area that connects the two chambers of what?
I thought it was the White House.
Nope. The White House looks like this, the president's house.
It looks the same.
Nope. No wings attached.
Oh,
No
yeah.
west wing, no east wing.
Oh, and
No.
I forget it got burned down.
Yeah, that's sucker.
No, it wasn't. Well, the structure survived the war, but the side parts where the Oval Office is not in the White House. People don't understand that. It's in the West Wing. Yeah, and so those were built in TR. That's when they actually christened it the White House, Theodore Roosevelt. So this is the Capitol. Again, the grand ideas just haven't really materialized. It looked like people said, this is the irony, right? It's supposed to model a Roman city, and it did, except that it looked like Roman ruins in an ancient city that had been abandoned. It wasn't done. It wasn't done by any stretch of the imagination. There was snipe and partridge shooting taking place while people poking guns out of both chambers of the Capitol. People with loaded guns going around, and they were a nuisance, and they were birds, and they were probably crapping everywhere. So near the wall of the Capitol, they were shooting birds and trying to get rid of the wild game that was still there. There was not a single merchant house, club, or theater in the nation's capital. A lot of the population was on poor relief because it was, I mean, this is the grand plan, and it hadn't really happened yet. The two wings of the Capitol building have a boardwalk in between it. The roof leaked. Hunks of the ceiling fell while members of Congress debated, and the columns that they had built around each structure were split and crumbling. So the United States, as usual, probably contracted to the lowest bidder, and with that in mind, they didn't exactly get really some quality workmanship. The president's palace was the largest house in the country in 1801. The brick kilns were all around it because they still had to fire the bricks right there. The Rome of the New World, it was not by any stretch of the imagination. There was no social or cultural life. People routinely commented that they got lost within the city when they were in the city. Visitors were passing through saying, all right, this is pretty whatever this is. How do we get to the Capitol? And the residents there would tell the folks, you're in the Capitol. And they would say, no, this can't be it. Where is the Capitol? And they're like, no, really, this is it right here. And they, in disbelief, they couldn't believe after 10 years that nothing really had been done to build it up.
But you can't build like stuff out of the swamp in just 10 years. It'll take time.
Right.
Like, look at Versailles. I mean.
Yeah, Rome wasn't built in a day either, right? For 20 years after its creation, the population remained under 10,000. The main occupation for people who lived, and many of them struggled to live and make a living in Washington, D.C., was to feed or board congressmen. Because no one built a house. They weren't in session all year. So they came in, they went to a session once a year and left. When they went back, where civilization existed, like Lexington, Kentucky, which no one would argue is this, back then was this great place or could compare, but it was favorable to Washington, D.C. So what does Jefferson do to realize the cutting the scope and the reach of the federal government? He slashes it. He decides to start sending his annual message, which is the State of the Union, to Congress. He writes it over there. Clerk or someone can read it in front of whoever decides to listen to Jefferson's annual message. The Army, he slashes to 3,000 soldiers. He wants to do it more, but people around him say, no, maybe we should have some kind of fighting force. The Navy, the mighty Navy that John Adams was going to build during the Quasi-War, he mothballs most of the fleet. We have 6 active frigates in 1801. If we need more, he says, take them out of the mothball fleet. Put them back out of dry dock, float them in the water, get the crew, get the captain, get the guns, and we'll go into using them if we have to. He decides to reduce the number of ambassadorships because that's wasteful and we have to pay these people salaries. So we should have 3 missions overseas: Britain, France, Spain. Well, there are more than 3 countries overseas, as you know, in Europe. But what happens with them? He says, I don't know, Britain, you cover Holland, and France, you cover Italy. We have a lot of dealings with Italy, and that's the way it'll work.
Aren't they closer?
Well, we have 3 missions because at the time he comes into office, remember what John Adams left him as a parting gift: peace with France. The Convention of 1800 ends the Quasi-War. The Jay Treaty is in effect with Great Britain. That was very unpopular. So there's no impending conflict with anybody in 1801. He didn't realize that France and England were just kind of pausing from fighting. But there was nothing really menacing on the horizon, except the fact that the worst kept secret in the European courts was actually that the Spanish had transferred Louisiana to France. Dun, dun, dun. So we see the demise, I think sorry?
So even that works out in his favor.
Well, yeah, and people will argue whether or not he stumbled upon it, he was lucky, or if he was the main player involved in it,
I'm sorry,
which we can still argue about, but certainly his actions as president bring about the slow demise of the Federalist Party. They didn't realize that 1796 was their last election for president they were going to win. He has, Jefferson, majorities in both the House and Senate who are Republicans. The only remainder of the Federalist Party, they're in Congress, they're the minority, they're in the House and Senate, they're in the state legislatures, but John Adams, also leaving, decides that he's going to appoint as many Federalist judges in the courts. So, which he can do, it's not a very nice thing to do. It doesn't reflect the fact that Jefferson or Burr won, and he shouldn't really do that, but every president does that. You put in your people, and the president who succeeds you can undo that or not in the case of, the Supreme Court, because one of the midnight appointments, as they're called, he's literally signing up until midnight when Jefferson's going to be sworn in. Didn't happen that way. It didn't. One of the midnight appointments is John Marshall, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and he is going to let federalism live for years. I mean, a generation in the form of the Supreme Court. He also repeals, does Jefferson, all internal taxes. Yep. Hamilton's hated excise on whiskey and distilled spirits, and all the taxes associated with the Quasi-War. A new naturalization law makes it easier to become a citizen, and the Alien and Sedition Acts expire. I said the quote that Jefferson has, and when he has that conversation with Adams in the show, is, I'm not going to preside over an era of witch hunting or witchcraft, which is what you're looking for, Adams and Hamilton, by proxy. So that's, again, part of the story where Jefferson will, I think for the most part, ensure the longevity of his party. Cut all taxes, peace around the world, and his greatest accomplishment as president, Louisiana, which we'll talk about as well. In 1801, let's go to the map again, if you're not familiar with the setting that year. Our neighbor to the west is Spain. And as long as that is the case, it's fine. You can see it right there, the Louisiana Purchase, but that technically was in the blue of the map, owned by the Spanish. The only block to the Americans settling to the west is Spain, and they control New Orleans. They've given us recently access to it in the Pinckney Treaty in 1795. That's fine with Jefferson. Let Spain be the European power that we share North America with. Spain is like a holding company. Their best days, 1588, when people went weak at the knees with the Spanish Armada. Oh no, the Spanish! Those days are far behind them. The Spanish Empire on paper looks impressive only on paper. Spain had used all of their gains in North America and not funneled that money back to where it should go, which is making the people in Spain wealthy. They've overextended themselves, and to protect that empire, they're going to spend a lot of the money that they're drawing out of their colonies, to keep their rivals, the Dutch, the Portuguese, the French, and the English away. When you're first, that's great, but everyone's going to try to knock you down, and it's been happening for over 200 years. The cast of characters around the Louisiana Purchase is amazing. Thomas Jefferson, his Secretary of State, he doesn't trust Burr, so his right-hand man is the general. If he's the generalissimo, Jefferson, the general of the party is Madison, as Secretary of State. James Monroe becomes a special envoy, and Robert Livingston, minister to Great Britain. In France, we have, of course, Napoleon, the ever-capricious Napoleon Bonaparte, and Charles Marie de Talleyrand, who the American government will be dealing with. And of course, let's give credit where credit is due. The person most responsible for the Louisiana Purchase is the greatest Black leader of the age, Toussaint L'Ouverture, the Black Spartacus, not the first person to use that designation. It never would have happened without a rebellion on Saint-Domingue, which is now Haiti. Two nations share that island. Of course, Saint-Domingue on the west side and Dominican Republic, or Santo Domingo, on the east side. Alexander Hamilton and Henry Adams a descendant of John Adams and John Quincy Adams, will later claim that Jefferson falls into the Louisiana Purchase and deserves no credit. Hamilton says, quote, fortuitous concurrences of unforeseen and unexpected circumstances, unquote, give Jefferson his greatest achievement as president. Maybe. Be that as it may, it happens in his first term. With Spain's power in decline, Jefferson is concerned that this might be happening too fast. He hears in 1801 that Spain had signed a secret treaty with France. The French tell the Americans, what? No treaty. But it's the British who tell the Americans, did you hear about this? And the Americans are like, what? Wait a minute. The Spanish give this land, Louisiana, to France. Now, as far as the Spanish were concerned, this was going to be their territory, and they could deal with it what they wanted to. The other part of the deal in this transfer of Louisiana from Spain to France is that the Spanish understood, you, France, can never sell it. So this Treaty of Ildefonso, I believe it's called, in 1800, 1801, is a transfer that Napoleon demands of the Spanish. And the Spanish say, okay, just make sure you don't give it away to somebody else. And the initials of that somebody else are USA. But it happens. This changes everything, however. When that territory transfers from Spain to France, that's when Jefferson's like, okay, now we've got a problem. From the most feeble nation ruling it to the strongest, from Spain to France. Everything points to Napoleon wanting to reestablish the French Empire in North America. That's what he has designs of doing after 1801. Whoever possesses New Orleans, Jefferson says, is our enemy. And he's got this fantastic quote. He says, from that point on, we should have to wed our commerce to the English Navy. Unthinkable for Jefferson. Inconceivable, some might say. But he knows it. The protection of the American commerce would have to be supplied by the English. And
Spain were to get control of, or France get more.
Now that France has control, yeah. Because what France is going to do, which they proceed to do, is pinch the American access to New Orleans and the lower Mississippi River, just the way the Spanish had done in the 1780s. The American minister in France, Robert Livingston, made a separate promise to Napoleon. This is how sometimes bold and gutsy Americans are, because we don't know any better half the time. We just like, oh, let's throw this fact out there and just kind of slap the Europeans in the face with the facts. Livingston tells Napoleon, you will suffer if you hold on to Louisiana, the same fate as the British in the American Revolutionary War. Time and space favor the United States. Your days of an empire in North America, they're never, ever going to happen. By the way, folks, if you threaten Napoleon this way, what happens to you? Ask the Russians what happens when you threaten Napoleon with, oh yeah, try this and this will happen. It doesn't really work well. The Russians know about this, and, you know, it didn't work well for Napoleon nevertheless.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, but you do get invaded. And that for Jefferson is also a scenario he doesn't want to see play out. He doesn't want to see that happen because it's going to have to build up an American fiscal military state that is counter to everything he had been wanting to do in the so-called Revolution of 1800. So Jefferson offers France $6 million for New Orleans and West Florida. That's going to be the Panhandle, everything from Baton Rouge, somewhere near the Apalachicola River, the Panhandle, most of the Panhandle at least. At least we'll get some territory, Jefferson says, in expectation for the inevitable French removal. We have to secure the lower Mississippi River and New Orleans, at the very least. Eventually, according to Jefferson, he predicts that we're not going to need troops in the area when the Americans are moving in, which they are after 1800. Even without the French, the Americans are swarming into the areas of New Orleans and to the north. The French have 3 steps to reestablish their empire in North America. Number 1 didn't go well, keep the treaty secret. That didn't happen. Let me go back to the class notes for us here. Keep ourselves on track here. Okay. The first part of the plan, keep the treaty secret. Couldn't happen. Didn't happen. Number 2, send 25,000 soldiers to Santo Domingo. Put down the slave rebellion. No problem. I mean, these are slave rebels. How bad could it be? How long will it take? How many soldiers would we need? Step 3, take possession after the slave rebellion is inevitably put down. Take possession of New Orleans. To Saint-Domingue, Napoleon sends his brother-in-law, Charles Leclerc, on the expedition. Jefferson, reaction to the news, he asked Congress to cut the size of the United States Army. Hi, how's it going?
Oh, God.
Cool.
Look at that. Well, we got a squirrel right up on the window over here, everybody. Fascinated by this story. Be careful. No, you got yourself up here. How are you going to get yourself down? So there's the expectation that from the successful putting down of the rebellion there, those soldiers will then be moved by the French Navy over to New Orleans. Jefferson cuts the size of the U.S. Army, and he predicts, Jefferson correctly. He apparently is the only one in America who thinks the scenario that Leclerc will surrender to Louverture. It's a dangerous gamble. Members of his own party are like, build up the Army and Navy, Mr. President. He's like, nah. It's like, they're going to get annihilated there. And they do. When you start sending slave rebels to the gallows to be hanged, and they're laughing on the way to the hangman's noose, you know you're in for a really long and difficult effort to put down this rebellion. That's what happens in Saint-Domingue. Up to this point, the French had used and would use, they think, and this is the scenario that Napoleon sets up for himself. We'll use Louisiana as a place for the French undesirables, the same way that the English had used Australia in a similar manner, maybe a penal colony. And then it will feed the important colonies of Saint-Domingue and Guadeloupe. That's the way it's going to happen in his mind. Napoleon sends 25,000 soldiers to Saint-Domingue with the promise of 25,000 more. They approach Toussaint-Louverture and celebrate the motto of the French Revolution: liberty, equality, and fraternity. Toussaint makes a mistake and trusts Leclerc. They capture him to the French army. And that is when hell is unleashed on Saint-Domingue. They hang, drown, decapitate, burn every black rebel they can find on the island. But it becomes hell on earth for the French. They reinstate the Code Noir, the Black Code, bringing the population back into slavery. Leclerc says it will take 6 weeks for this to happen. Toussaint allowed Leclerc to land without opposition. He's then sent out of Saint-Domingue, where he goes to a dungeon in Switzerland. He won't be there, but his arrest and being basically sent out of the island begins the rebellion. He told the French, Louverture, on his way out, you have no idea what is coming next. It's very bad. The population of 500,000 African Americans, either free people of color or slave, face now 40,000 French, which is separate of the soldiers. So once again, unlike these islands, you have a overwhelmingly enslaved majority of the population controlled by the French colonist minority. Hundreds of black prisoners strangle themselves and laugh as they are burned and executed. Leclerc's last message is 6 weeks, all put down in 6 weeks. Leclerc's last message from the island, as he dies along with a lot of his army of yellow fever, quote, this colony is lost and you will never regain it, unquote. Wow. 60,000 French casualties, soldiers and colonists on the island. A combination of battle deaths, yellow fever, and malaria. That army of 25, 30,000, maybe it's 2,500, 3,000, 90% dead. In April in 1803, Napoleon renounces Louisiana and begins having Talleyrand talk to the Americans. By that point, Jefferson wanted to send over Madison. Madison's like, on a transatlantic voyage, I'll die. He's something of a hypochondriac, Madison, and doesn't think he'll go back and forth and live at the other end of it. So he sends James Monroe to, again, bolster. It shows, just like Adams did negotiating with the French in 1800, we're still serious about talking. And so they offer the French $12.5 million for Louisiana. Livingston knew that this was exceeding his instructions. He was authorized to spend $6 on lower Louisiana, which includes New Orleans and the Florida Panhandle. He says, I got to consult the bosses back, obviously, in the United States, to which Talleyrand says, don't take too long. This offer isn't on the table for much longer. Act now, as they say in the commercials. So he agrees to buy it, kind of going beyond his instructions. News reaches the United States July 3rd, 1803. It makes the 4th for Jefferson all the more special. Before the purchase is finalized, Jefferson organizes. Before it's finalized, before it's even in American hands, Jefferson organizes a military expedition to the area. He sneaked into a bill which was going to establish a trading post on the Mississippi River, about $3,500 for the Corps of Discovery, which is known as the Lewis and Clark Expedition. That's a whole separate story that you are probably somewhat familiar with. The French give no guidance on the boundaries. When we purchase it, we look over maps, and no maps agree where Louisiana starts and where, the rest of the territory ends. Jefferson will later claim West Florida is included. All Florida is included in the Louisiana Purchase. He will also claim Texas is included in the Louisiana Purchase, which the people of Spain say, no, it is not. So he says to Madison, always talk to the Spanish and tell them West Florida is part of it. And they say, no, it isn't. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. And eventually they will give up. It takes a little while longer than that for the Spanish to give up the Floridas. Well, nevertheless.
How far, to Florida? Would you say to Mobile or?
Yeah, I was going to include all of that, all the way to close to modern Pensacola. Yeah, and maybe a little east of that further. The only issue, of course, is the constitutionality of the whole thing. Thomas Jefferson, right? Small government, limited budget, pay off the debt, pay it off in 16 years. Operate where the United States takes in more money than it spends. Oh, imagine that idea. And we will, because we slash the expenses of the United States. So the Federalists now become the party, talking about not mooring to your political beliefs and flipping. The Federalists now become the party of strict construction. What right does the president have to make this purchase? Where is it in the Constitution? To which Jefferson and Madison must have loved it and said, this is the party that said from the phrase necessary and proper, we can have a bank. So Jefferson later says, look, the less we say about the constitutional matters is the better. We have a majority in the House and Senate. We'll run it through as a treaty. Only the most myopic Federalists and the strict constitutionalists in his own party say anything about it, like it shouldn't be done. So it's the greatest achievement in his presidency. And that leaves us to talking about another, later on, we'll save this for next time, along with Burr Hamilton and the duel. Jefferson sending the American Navy, as small as it was, to shiver the timbers, as the naval expression is. I know, I saw the eye roll. With the idea of shivering the timbers of the Tripolitan pirates in North Africa. It all connects back to the idea that not under the English flag anymore, the American merchant fleet, our commerce fleet, is getting harassed by the different individual countries there in North Africa, and what Jefferson does about it.
There's pirates still around today.
There are, absolutely. So this is Jefferson saying, in this case, short-term war better than paying off the bribes that these countries insist upon with the Europeans. So it's another story that not a lot of people know about, but twice the United States in an undeclared war went to war in North Africa. First here in Jefferson's first term, and then at the end of the War of 1812. It's often called the Second Tripolitan War, and James Madison is the president for that.